Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Team Comp Tuesday, the series where every Tuesday we take a look at a different team. Sorry for this one being a little bit late, I was out visiting family this week, but we're back at it. This week we have Raiden teams, or a Raiden team since Raiden is on the banner. We kind of already covered in a previous video the Hyper Bloom team a little while back with Raiden, which is, in my opinion, her default team at this point in time, as it is proven to be about as good as a ridiculously high invested Hypercarry team. And by ridiculously high invested, I mean like C3 with engulfing is about the same as a C0 Hyper Bloom with a Dragon's Bane. So I personally consider that her default team now. Also, it's kind of like, we'll get into some of the issues of her other teams, but Raiden is a super fun unit, pretty versatile. A unit most people probably should have on your account. She's just a really sweet character. She's a character I really like from a design and a gameplay standpoint, even if I don't necessarily agree with. And there are some also misconceptions about her power level, especially at like C0. She's still perfectly fine at C0, and even Hypercarry is still good at C0, but Hypercarry is not good at C0 for the same reasons it's not good at C6. So we'll get to that in a little bit when I talk about the downsides to this kind of team. But this will be Raiden Hypercarry. This is kind of her fun team, the team that you probably will use the most just running around, but probably the team you're least likely to use in the Abyss. At least the team of hers you should be least likely to use, because if you should either be playing probably National, Raiden National because it does more damn, or what's it called? The Dendro team, because it doesn't require Bennett, so you can still play International on the other side if you actually really care about meta. But side point, this is a super fun team. This is a good way to show off your Raiden and how much damage she can do. So let's get into it. So just really quickly before we get into the next section of the video, where we have another showcase and then go on to the builds and stuff, I just wanted to briefly talk about Raiden and like this team in general and kind of community perception of it and what I think is a little bit overblown. So first things first, there's the obvious one, which is people ask all the time or talk about, do you need C2 to play this team? No, this team is perfectly playable at C1, or sorry, at C0. The C2 and C3 are a nice damage increase, so is Engulfing Lightning, but it kind of looks like it's more damage increase than it actually is, since the rotation is not, Raiden is not permanently ulting. So even if it does mean she does like 30, or she does 40 or even 50% extra dam in her ult, or even as much as double extra damage in her ult, she's not only is she not all of the damage in the team, she's also not permanently an ult, and that means that realistically it does end up being less of a damage increase than you think. It's definitely still a good damage increase, and if Raiden is 100% your favorite character, it's not an awful idea to try to get constellations for her weapon. I just personally think it's a little bit overblown. You don't need it. You're better off... Genshin as a game, you're almost better off always going wide than you are going really deep into a couple characters. This is because a lot of times in certain types of content or versus certain characters, it's better to have stuff that matches up better if you actually care about power level, over just like fun and enjoyment. Obviously, if you have a favorite character and you want to hyper invest in them, go for it. But I think even then, in my opinion, as someone who absolutely loves people like Zhao, Hu Tao, or even like Sino, I have invested into them quite a bit, but really, some of them I've only picked up like their weapons. Like I picked up Sino's weapon, Hu Tao's weapon. I did go for constellations on Hu Tao, but that's because her C1 actually dynamically changes the way you can play her a bit, and those are personally, in my opinion, the only constellations worth going for, is if there's a constellation that changes how you can play the character and you really like the character. But even then, like, I actually think C1 Hu Tao is a little bit overblown. It's a convenience a lot of the times if you're like proficient at playing her. Like I still sometimes just do C0 combos just to make sure I still like have it in my brain for whenever I do her video and stuff like that with jump cancels. But I also want to talk about this team's power level in general. So this team is kind of like, in my opinion, it's very much a meta team, but it has that weird position that a lot of teams do where it just kind of sucks units from teams that are arguably better. So from a pure power standpoint, I think this team's sometimes a little bit overrated. It definitely performs, but, you know, in my opinion, a lot of times if you're going to play Raiden Hyper, you might as well play Raiden National because you're already committing to using Bennett. If you're going to commit to use Bennett, like, that just means Zhangling has nowhere to go really now, so you might as well throw Zhangling and Jingqiu on here and get the Raiden national team. But there still are plenty of, like, double team formats that allow you to play Raiden Hyper on one side and a different character on the other side. Plenty of them. But that's just kind of like my general opinion, is that Raiden National is kind of the better team to focus on. Like, if you had the option between getting, like, let's say, I don't know, a 5-star spear for Zhangling or like a 5-star spear for Zhangling and a 5-star sword for Jingqiu or something for your Raiden national team versus getting C2 Raiden, I would rather get those weapons and stuff for the other characters personally, but that's just up to me. Oh, another side point is a lot of people are going to talk about Sarah. I will talk about Sarah whenever we get to builds, but Sarah's kind of, in my opinion, a little bit overrated in this team. She does make Raiden do more damage, and at C6 she is very competitive with Fischl, but definitely pre-C6, someone like Fischl just ends up being more damage. And even at C6, Fischl is such a powerhouse unit that she will a lot of times end up overcompensating for the damage lost by not having the Sarah buff to transfer to Raiden. But that's just my opinion, my way I like to play it. And, like, that way you don't have to build Sarah, which I think is kind of a... Sarah's a really niche unit that really is only usable on this team. And even then, only at C6, really. Usable at C2, but definitely really want, like, C6 for it. And that just means you get to save the resources if you're not going to be playing her. So that's just my quick thoughts on some general things before we get back into the builds and the showcase. Alright, now it's time to go over the character builds. So we're starting off with Raiden. Weapon, the catch, free, very good for her. Even compared to her best in slot weapon, it's honestly not that much worse. Like, it's really good. You probably should just use it if you have it. Obviously, her best in slot is her 5-star weapon. If you want it, go for it. Sure. Kind of underrated. Favlance, pretty good. High base attack, energy recharge, gives some energy recharge. Hurts her personal damage a little bit. Probably wouldn't do it with this team, but in a team like Raiden National, kind of underrated. Any crit weapon, deathmatch is perfectly fine. 5-star weapons are perfectly fine, but will not end up beating the catch often by a significant amount. So generally better off using those weapons on other characters. The main problem just with the catch is the competition with Zhangling. It's like the main weakness. But, you know, this weapon's basically built for her. She uses the energy recharge, burst damage, crit rate. Great. Artifacts, best way to go. Emblem. This works by far her best with the way she is built and the way she is played, as you generally want to stack a lot of element or energy recharge, and she has other synergies with energy recharge. So, good way to go. For the artifacts, now there's a little bit of debate. Personally, in a team like this where she is on field more, I would go with the attack sands. You can go with the energy recharge sands. The way I generally look at it is do the inverse of your weapon. So if your weapon is an attack weapon or like a crit weapon, use energy recharge. If your weapon is an energy recharge, use a attack or something like that. Goblet, Electro, or Attack are actually both good here. Just whichever you have better subsets on is the way to go. I have better on a Electro Goblet, so I'm using Electro. And then final up, any either crit rate or a crit damage. Is this really the best crit rate? Wow, my crit rate hats from this... My crit hats from this dungeon are garbage. I farmed like months for those. But anyway, constellations. I'm just going to go over this since a lot of people are going to mention it. Yes, C2, C3, pretty significant DPS increases. Not needed by any stretch of the imagination to play this team. And again, in my opinion, this is kind of the weakest of her three teams, or it's not the weakest of her three teams. It's the one you're least likely to play, especially if you aren't a child enjoyer. If you don't have child and don't play child a lot, then she is probably your best character for a national team, to use Zhangling, one of the most powerful free units we're given. So, especially assuming you aren't a child player, you have two better teams to put her in, where these changes are not going to matter that much. In Hyper Bloom, they're not going to matter at all. In a national team, it will be a good damage increase for her, but she's only less than half, like a third at most of the team's damage. So even if you give her 50% damage increase, you're really only giving like another 10% damage to the team. And while that's good, that's not the end of the world. You can make that up with a better gameplay, better setup, stuff like that. I wouldn't feel like you need to roll these, in my personal opinion, despite them being very powerful. But then again, I am of the opinion that basically no 5-star constellation is worth it, just due to how expensive they are and how much most of the time just having another character or another team is just going to be better. Like there's plenty of times where you could say, oh, I have C2 Raiden, but I can destroy this content. But then it's like, yeah, but they're small enemies. They're going to get knocked away by overloads and stuff like that. And at that case, you're better off having a C0 of another character that could freeze them and keep them in place. And you would clear just as fast, if not faster. So, I don't know. Give or take, it is very tempting to go for this, since it is a pretty significant damage increase for her. And she is kind of like one of the premier fun meta units. But my personal take is, maybe if you save up a ton of primos over time and there's no one you want for the foreseeable future, go for it. But if you're like me and I'm sitting here like, man, I want Alhaitham next patch and I want Deja the patch after that, it's like I can't really justify it. And it is 100% nothing in this game is worth swiping on, especially rolls. If you want to get the battle pass, get you some Welkins, perfectly fine. Not actually that bad of a deal, but do not buy rolls, please, unless you are. You know what? Send me the money instead. I'll do better things with it. I'm just kidding. But that's my TED talk on the constellations. No, you don't need it to play Hypercarry. You can play Hypercarry without it. You'll be perfectly fine. Talents, E and Ultimate are the only ones that matter. This is because she has the attack modifiers on her Ultimate, similar to someone like Sino that we talked about earlier, meaning that you don't actually need to level up her normal attacks to get the damage increase. This is definitely one of those talents that is very much worth crowning if you're going to use her a ton, as the damage increase per talent level is actually pretty high. This is also what makes her C3 pretty good. But yeah, that's Raiden. Let's go on to the next one. Alright, next up is the Flex Electro slot. I'm going to give you my TLDR. 3 different options. You pick which one you want to use. My opinion, best one, Fischl. Lowest damage for Raiden, highest damage output in total. Weakness, doesn't really do a ton of AoE damage. However, since this team does cause a bit of overload, you generally don't want to be playing it in AoE content anyway. But that is a reasonable reason to want someone else instead. But even then, she still does a lot of damage and is someone you probably have built anyway, so resources will not be split. Weapons, any crit base damage weapon is fine. Stringless is fine as well, since it buffs Oz damage. Artifacts, any amount of attack or gladiator. She has the option to run Millith in this team. However, it does sack her personal damage quite a bit to do so. Talents, Oz is really the only one you care about, although you can level up her burst. Speaking of which, I still need to do that, as these skills are really powerful and I don't know why they're still underleveled. Alright, next character option you have is, where is she? Sarah. This is the one you should use if you have her at C6 and you want Raiden to do as much damage as humanly possible. Now, I know it's a Raiden Hypercarry team, but the truth is Fischl does so much damage that a lot of times she ends up making up for it. But if you want to just have Raiden get the biggest numbers humanly possible, this is the way to go. I'll probably do 1 or 2 of the showcases with her just to show you the damage difference. Maybe not, though, because I don't know. I don't really like her. Weapons. She is similar to Bennett, so highest base attack weapon you can get. Skyward Harp, whichever craftable has the highest base attack. Sorry, I don't know off the top of my head which craftable has the highest base attack. But base attack's all that matters. Get the bow with the highest base attack on her. Actually, energy recharge is good as well. but I don't think there's any bows that have both a high base attack and energy recharge. Maybe Sacrificial, but that's kind of loose. Artifacts, Emblem of Severed Fate, very similar to Raiden, needs a lot of energy, so run her on the Emblem set. But for her energy recharge, Electro damage crit, Official is attack, crit, and Electro, just so you know. Constellations, these are the important ones. This is kind of the convenient one here that makes her easier to use, so I would 100% not use her if you don't have this. And this is the one that a lot of people put value in and making her very much more competitive with Fischl. Without it, I actually don't think she's super competitive with Fischl, but this can make her competitive with Fischl if you want to run her. Be my guest. Talents, burst is really the only thing you care, or burst and E. The attack damage ratio is actually on the E, so you want the E leveled up as high as possible, but the burst can do decent damage. Kind of her problem is that she does have a high cost burst, which is both good for fueling a Raiden to get more resolve stacks, but also bad because it means sometimes she won't have her burst back even with a good amount of energy recharge plus having Raiden battery her, obviously, so that's something to keep in mind. And the final option, which is kind of like the super budget option, if you want to play it, Lisa with, where is it? Slap a TTDS on Lisa, slap some Noblesse or something on her, and then just use her burst here for the, where is it, the defense shred. Not a terrible option as long as you're making sure you catch the buffs on Raiden. Lisa also high energy requirements, so on the artifacts, which you probably should be running like Emblem. Actually, basically just use the same set as Sarah. So Emblem, energy recharge, electro damage, and then either crit rate or crit dam on the helmet, depending on what you need. Alright, now let's talk about the buff units for this team. Let's talk about our non-electro units. Kazuha. First up, weapon. Iron Sting is actually pretty usable in this team, or Freedom Sworn, due to your Raiden helping with energy recharge requirements, especially if you have pretty decent artifacts. Definitely doable. The safe pick, as always, though, is to run Favonius Sword, as it's just default his best weapon. Vivi, as always, Elemental Mastery, Elemental Mastery, Elemental Mastery on all three pieces. Talents, Burst. You need to level all three if you actually want him to deal damage. If you just care about getting the most out of a single talent, his Burst is the best. But since his E here does not have plunge attack modifier, like how Raiden's has normal attack and plunge attack modifiers on her Burst, this means you actually need to level up the auto attack as well to get the damage increase. And now, as always, the star of the show, the Benny Boy. Weapons, Aquila Favonius. Best weapon if you have it. Any other high base attack weapon is good. For free to play, the weapon I still don't have because I'm still too lazy to go get it is the Sumer Craftable. Has energy recharge as a substat, has a high base attack. Very good option if you don't have a 5-star sword for Bennett. Artifacts, Noblesse, way to go. Energy recharge, 100% on the Sands, and then you can either go straight healer by HP on Gob and Circlet, or you can build some damage like I do and go pyro damage and crit rate. Talents, ultimate is really the only one you care about, although you will be using the E sometimes to fill down time, so if you want to level that up you can, but the ultimate is the main thing you care about, giving you that fatty attack bonus. Alright, we're going to do the rough rotation at this point. But in general, the way the team works is you just want to make sure you cast your thing at the beginning. Swirl Electro, drop Bennett Burst. Ideally, you then want to make sure you're overloading constantly with the Kazuha Burst. as well as making sure you Sarah burst at the end. This is due to the lower duration on the Sarah buff, only lasting 6 seconds, so you want to do it last before you swap into Raiden to burst. And then you're just going to be N3 C'ing. I think it's 4 or 5 times that you can N1 C to get the last one, and then everything should melt. If you're using Fischl, it's basically the same setup. You just don't have to necessarily worry about where you drop Oz in the combo. There is a little bit of min-maxing you can do with Fischl, which is because of Raiden's... where is that here? The resolve stack she gets for her allies pressing their bursts. You actually want to use Fischl's burst Oz instead of her normal Oz in order to stack that up a little bit more to get a little bit more damage out of your Raiden burst. That's a little bit of tech you can do. But Lisa's plays basically the exact same way as Sarah. You just drop the Lisa burst afterwards. If you're versus mobs that can be pushed around, I'd be a little bit careful Kazuha ulting on the Bennett burst. You're probably better Kazuha ulting Electro. But if you're versus people who can't get pushed around, the extra overload damage is just a little bit of gravy on top, so it's definitely worth trying to do if you're versus enemies that'll not get pushed all to hell. But that's going to be it for this week's Team Comp Tuesday. I hope you enjoyed. I wish you luck if you're rolling on Raiden. Next week we'll be doing another Raiden team, but Raiden National will probably be next week's team. I would do Ayato teams, but I have not actually rolled Ayato, so sorry about that. I don't necessarily have access to an account that has him, but maybe I'll just mention them at some point in the video. I don't know. We'll see. But good luck anyone rolling for Raiden, and I hope you have a great day, and I hope you had a Merry Christmas as well, as it's around that time of year.